As more and more businesses are now feeling the impact of coronavirus, banks have now had a really good look right across their whole business book and have agreed to extend the 6-month deferral of payments beyond small businesses, so into a much larger category of businesses who between them employ approximately 1.5 million Australians. So the small business loans were available, or repayment deferrals were available for loans up to about $3 million. This will extend that eligibility to all businesses that have a loan of up to $10 million. This will now cover 98% of the business book of Australian banks. That is, of all Australian businesses who have a loan with an Australian bank, 98% of them will now be eligible for a 6-month deferral of loan repayments while we get through this pandemic.
There's some pretty important caveats on this tranche of your loan repayment deferrals, including that the landlords, if they take this up, cannot evict their tenants in that time, and also that they do have to extend the term of their loan and agree to higher repayments. Is that realistic to expect them to be able to afford that?
Well, let me deal first with commercial property landlords. By lifting the eligibility threshold, it does pick up a very substantial number of commercial property landlords. 89% of all Australian commercial landlords who have a loan with an Australian bank will now be eligible for a repayment deferral on their loan. And banks, I think, have got a pretty clear message for those customers, and that is, if you do the right thing by your tenants, then the bank will do the right thing by you. I think most Australians would expect that if landlords are being given relief, that some of the benefit of that needs to flow on to their tenants. As the Prime Minister talks increasingly about hibernation, this kind of initiative helps to make hibernation possible and real, not only for small business tenants, but also for those commercial landlords. And just as the pain is filtering its way through a very interconnected economy, when relief is available, it should also filter down to all parts that need it. In relation to the provisions that will happen at the end of this 6 months, these are the same as apply for mortgage deferrals and for small business loan deferrals, and that is the interest on these loans will continue to accrue through the 6-month period. But at the end of that period, there will not be a large balloon payment. There's no nasty surprises here, but customers will be given the choice of whether they want to make those payments with a slight increase across the life of the loan, or whether they want to extend the life of the loan. This is about making it possible for banks within their regulatory requirements and affordable for customers when they need help.
You mentioned mortgage holders there. Are we expecting to see an announcement like this from the banks to help people who are having trouble paying their mortgage repayments?
I think all Australian banks who have a mortgage book have now announced individually that they are providing relief of up to 6 months for all mortgage holders. And I know that last week Australian banks saw inquiries from some 100,000 Australian mortgage holders trying to access that relief. So we know that there's a lot of people out there who are losing their jobs, and the first thing they worry about is paying their mortgage. Can I just repeat, Australian banks have all agreed that they will provide up to 6-month deferrals on people's mortgages. They just need to be talking to their banks as quickly as possible.
When we spoke last time, it wasn't that long ago, the message was that you hadn't seen many people in mortgage distress yet. You're saying 100,000 now. Are you expecting that to get much worse?
Well, I think it's hard for any of us to predict where this might go, but I think what we saw last week with the government's decision to close down a significant number of workplaces, we saw people very rapidly losing their job, literally overnight. And that's when people worry about their mortgage. For most Australian households, your mortgage payment is your largest expense. It's the largest outgoing. And keeping a roof over your head and for yourself and your family is something that Australians hold very dear. So I'm not surprised that as soon as we started to see literally thousands and thousands of Australians losing their jobs overnight last week, that banks started to get calls, and they've responded to that. They've now agreed that mortgages can be deferred for up to 6 months, and as I said, they're starting to get hundreds of thousands of calls about that. So this impact is
We have seen
right across the business sector, but it's going very deeply into the household sector as well.
And just on that as well, I mean, Australians have the highest level of household debt in the world, I think it is. It is an extraordinarily high level because our property prices are so high as a key factor. Do you think that there is going to be a real seismic change in that space, given what we're seeing in the economy?
Annalisa, I think it's not hard to look 6 months down the track and see that there might be many things that have changed. I wouldn't like to predict that we're going to see any drastic changes in the property market. What I am saying is that for those mortgage holders who are worried today, if you've lost your job, if you've had your hours cut, if you're having any of these impacts that might make it harder for you to pay your mortgage, make it harder for you as a small business to pay your loan repayments. And now, as of today, if you are a larger business, up to borrowings of $10 million, there's relief available, taking the weight of worry about your loan repayments off your shoulders. Many of these businesses have got a lot of other things to worry about, but if banks can take this one off their shoulders, then I think, as I said, it helps to make the idea of hibernation not only possible but very affordable.
When it comes to that prospect of hibernation, though, I mean, we're talking about $250 billion that the banks are taking on for at least the next 6 months. That seems like an extraordinarily high amount. How can they afford it?
Well, I should clarify, the $250 billion is the amount of loans that would be eligible to have their principal and interest repayments deferred. So it gives you a size of just how much of the bank's lending book is potentially impacted. But I know that at least one bank has been out this morning saying, one of the major banks saying that for them this could represent up to $3.3 billion in additional deferred loan repayments from this additional sector of business. So it is a sizable commitment for banks, and they've had to work very carefully with the regulator, with APRA, because one of the reasons banks can do this is because they went into this crisis very, very strongly. They are better capitalised than most banks anywhere in the world, and they have very strong balance sheets. We want to make sure that when we come out of this crisis, our banks remain strong, remain stable, so that they can help Australians come out of the crisis strong, ready to grow, and that they can continue to be putting credit into the economy. So yes, it's a big commitment. It's one that the regulator is comfortable will not threaten the security, strength or stability of the system. But I do think it does represent, it's probably as far as banks can go in this deferral of payment space, up to $10 million in their business lending book. But as I said, that covers 98% of Australian businesses who have a loan with an Aussie bank. For those businesses that have loans much higher than that, banks are not saying they can't help them, only that they would have to do that on an assessment on a case-by-case basis. These are often much larger businesses, much more complex in their financing arrangements, and will need to go into a much deeper assessment, as I said, on a case-by-case basis. So the financial firepower of Australian banks is helping us get through it.
You've just said that that's as far as banks can go in this loan deferral space. Is there anything else banks are looking at, or is this the last we can expect from banks in helping us through the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, you will have seen that last Sunday the government announced a small business guarantee loan scheme. They have been working with banks over the last 5 days to put in place the scheme rules, and that scheme will be up and fully operational on Wednesday this week, the 1st of April. What that means is that there are many small businesses who a loan deferral doesn't help because they don't have any loans. What this will do is allow businesses, large and small, whether they have a loan, existing loan or not, to access further working capital if they need it, and they'll be able to do that at a cheaper price than the market would have done otherwise, because 50% of that loan is guaranteed by the government. So there is still working capital available, and at a better price than you would have paid before coronavirus. And that's designed completely to ensure that those small businesses who are still able to function but might need some working capital to get through some bumpy patches can do so.